Okay, so we're going to get started because now we're 6 past, and we're going to start with introducing ourselves. I'm going to call on each one of us to introduce ourselves. Just a quick thing we like to do, just to clarify why, we will also describe ourselves because we have people joining us, for example, who are blind, and we want to be able to describe our environment and how we look. So I'm just going to get started. So hello, my name is Chisom Udeze. I am the founder of Diversify. I am an economist and also a diversity and inclusion strategist and consultant. Really happy to be here again. I think we've been doing these sessions now for almost 3 years on a monthly basis, so it's quite nice to continue in the tradition, and I'm super happy to have, Amma, Miguel, and Wenche here with us. For describing myself, my background is blurred. You might see an outline of a round clock, but maybe you don't see that very well as well. I am a Black woman. I have brown skin. I am wearing a maroon-ish beret that has a little bit of a golden-ish button. I am wearing a green sweater. And I have my hair in curls, but put in a bun behind my head. Okay, that's me. So I'm going to pass it on to Miguel.
Thank you, Chisom. Good to see you, everyone. Also, I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very thankful for the opportunity. My name is Miguel. Miguel Ángel Leiva Salas. It's maybe a telenovela name for some people. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a social psychologist, and currently I'm a DA associate and research analyst at Diversify. I'm wearing a black sweater over a pink shirt, and my background is also a pink wall. I am very light-skinned Mexican, maybe we could even say like white presenting Mexican. I have a small mustache with a really small beard, dark hair, short hair. And yeah, that's me. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Miguel. Amma, you're next on my screen.
Hi, everyone. My name is Amma Afrifa-Tchie. I am the Global Expert Specialist Advisor at Norwegian Refugee Council. And that's the Global Expert Advisor in Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I'm also the founder of the Inclusion Agilist, which is my own DEI consultancy. I am a Black woman, brown skin. I am wearing black framed, I think they're cat kind of glasses. I think the model is cat glasses, very big, basically. I have my hair in long braids, but I've tied it back today. I'm wearing a multicolored striped jumper or sweater, depending on where you are from. And it's gray, yellow, black, and pink. And I also have a necklace on with 2 hearts. My pronouns are she and her.
Thanks, Amma. And Wenche, we come to you.
Yes, hello, everyone. So my name is Wenche Fredriksen. My pronouns are she and her. I am currently the head of diversity and inclusion at DNB, the Norwegian bank, which is a big, I think it's the biggest bank in Scandinavia, about 10,500 employees. I joined a year and a half ago after spending 30 years at Accenture working with inclusion and diversity for many years. I am a white woman. I'm 60 years old. I have a round face. I have glasses that are teal colored and brown. I have a black shirt on. My hair is asymmetrical hairdo with blonde stripes in it. Behind me, I have a white wall and there's a painting, and I'm actually in DNB in Stockholm right now. So yes, that's me.
Thanks for joining. Thanks for making the time, Wenche. I know like this is a very busy day for you, so thank you for being here. Okay, so today we are addressing mental health. Like, how do we actually create enabling environments for people to thrive at work, personally, in society? And if you've been joining a lot of our sessions or digital events, you might see that oftentimes, or you might know that oftentimes we ask specific questions to each panelist, then we engage, debate, agree. Today, we are using a different format because mental health is something that each of us, have direct experience with. And with everything going on in the world right now, it couldn't come at a better time to discuss mental health and how we are faring. So today, instead of asking specific questions, what I'm going to do in holding this space is I'm going to say words, and given those words that come up, each of us can go in rounds and kind of share what comes up for us, because we think that mental health is so complex that this does it really good justice, especially in this day and time that we're living in. So I'm going to start that by offering my first word, which is mental health. And with that, I'm going to start with Wenche to tell us, when you hear mental health, what comes up for you?
For me, after struggling for years, not feeling good enough and being a perfectionist, mental health is about being truly human, about being your authentic self, about being vulnerable, about being myself in all my glory and shortcomings and being proud of it. Because I'm not a machine, I'm not a robot, I'm a human being, and I'm not perfect.
Thank you. Emma.
I think I'll just keep myself off mute. I couldn't say it better, Wenche, but I think also for me to add to that, I think it's a constant evolving journey of self around feelings, emotions, life, physical. It's every anatomy of being a human being, I think, but more so around the emotional perspective that connects to everything else that sometimes is neglected. And like I said feelings. And it's a journey of peaks and troughs, of sometimes having good days, sometimes having bad days, and sometimes just recognizing that, enough is enough rather than trying to be more than that. And sometimes when you think you've solved it, something else comes in. So it's definitely a wide and huge spectrum of different things, but it's everything about being a human being and the anatomy of that. So it's everything that makes us who we are.
Thanks, Emma. Miguel?
Yeah, for me, it's also, it has a really strong individual component, but I do believe that it's also a collective responsibility towards one another, to care for you and to care for others. You, at least the way I perceive it, you are only you might be only as well as the person next to you, right? So I think it's also a shared journey, especially, for example, giving into the context of like we're living in a post-pandemic, where now anxiety and depression seem to be like the new kind of pandemic. And I think it's something that we should all, as society, to look into.
Thanks for sharing. And I guess if I could add to that, I definitely resonate with everything you'll say. And one of the things that have been present for me around mental health is that it is a strong lesson in humility, because I'm beginning to, understand what my limitations are. And sometimes when I even think I have it figured out, I'm smacked in the face, and reminded that, it's a journey. So it's a lesson in humility and lesson in forgiveness. And I think we'll talk more about that and can explain a bit more. But in terms of my mental health, being able to remove myself from what has been socialized as in terms of like expectations of how I should be, who I should be, how I should present, how I should show up in this world. And sometimes this socialization I have also internalized, and I hold myself to the most ridiculous standard, and being able to forgive myself even when I think I'm failing because I'm not. I also think about that in terms of mental health. Amma.
I just wanted to add the word kindness to that too. That was all. Being kind.
Yeah.
It's easier said than done, but yeah, humility and definitely kindness.
Absolutely. Okay, the next word I'm throwing in today is stigma. And when we think about stigma, we can think about things like insanity, crazy, labels, double standards, catch-22. Like, so what comes up for you when you hear the word stigma, Wenche? Wenche, you're mute.
Sorry. I think the first time that I felt the stigma, I think I was a little girl and 11 years old. I think the first time I experienced this enormous sadness, I didn't have the words to describe it as a depression. But I remember my mom, she used the word that I went crazy. She used words that I felt so bad, and I felt like, you know, I was afraid, am I crazy? Am I insane? I didn't understand what I was dealing with. And I just decided as a little girl that I will have, you know, a happy life. I decided that if this was something that was supposed to be a part of my life, I will be, you know, perfect in every area, and I will try to oppress this. And the stigma, you know, I'm 60 years old. This was in the 70s. It was just not talked about. And then I started working, was the first one in my family to go to university. I was a perfectionist. I worked so hard to fit in and to be good enough. And then I, for some reason, ended up in the consulting industry or business. And there was a lot of expectations of being perfect. And I failed. I burned out at the age of 37. I was on full-time sick leave for 3 years. I became 50% on disability. It took me 10 years to work full-time. And I remember I decided at that point that I would own my story. I will share it and I will own it. And I found my voice and my purpose through this. And sharing my story back now we're in 2003, and there was no one who had a mental health but me at that point. It was all about facade and fitting in. And I remember someone said to me, are you not afraid of the stigma, you know, by being open about what you've gone through? And I said, I will never, ever work any place that do not value my experience and see it as an asset that I bring with me. So I decided to be proud of what I have survived and what I have learned and what I've been through. And I think, you know, going through the process of that, it relates very much for me to the word shame and the internalized shame that I had in the years when this was going on. It was like eating me up from the inside. And what you don't need in the middle of everything that you're going through is shame. It just makes it so much worse. We don't need it, basically. So I think that's what comes in, and we need to get rid of this both stigma and shame, because we are human beings, and we know that, you know, 50% of us will experience, you know, a mental health you know, issues through your lifetime. So we're not alone. And yeah, I think that's it's shame, and it's we should be proud, basically.
Thanks for sharing. So much comes up for me. I'm just like writing down. And also just to say at this point, you know, with the first couple of questions or like words I'm putting out, it's really just to create a foundational theme. And then we're going to go more in depth in a bit. But Amma, stigma, what comes up for you?
Shame has already been mentioned, so I won't cover that. But I think for me, it's fear and fear of the unknown. I think it's stigma is a word that society, I think when society, we are all society. So when we talk about society, sometimes I find it really interesting when we talk about something because we want to put it somewhere far away from us, but we are all part of society. So I think we, members of society, people of society, have, we often, when we're not sure about something, or we always want to put something in a box. We always want to be able to explain something, capitalize it, because then it makes sense to us. And then we're able to either control it, manipulate it, do whatever we want to do with it, however we want to. So when I think of the word stigma, I think of fear of the unknown. I think of fear of the known too. I think of sadness involved, negativity involved with that, because again, we haven't taken the time to truly understand the topic and the experiences and how we can make solutions that actually are valid, that speak to people's lived experience and have access and all that stuff. So stigma, whether it's in the workplace or in your personal life, is very much the association of fear, a negative, coming from a very negative place that puts somebody who is going through or experiencing mental ill health or a mental condition in a place where they feel inferior of who they are, and it breaks them down to the core. And so I think that there is something in reimagining what stigma is and redesigning it so that actually it becomes a different term and association in a positive way. Because I think that over the years that have passed, and it's due to lack of knowledge, you know, Wenche, you talk about, you know, growing up in the 70s and 80s, and, you know, if we had younger members on the panel today, I'm sure their experiences would be very different. And that's the key thing around this mental health, whether it's mental health, mental well-being, stigma, whatever it is. When we look back in the past, the historical context is there was never enough information to begin with. Now we're in an era, I'm trying to say that word. We're now in a place and position where that is not acceptable anymore. But there's also still room for continued growth in that. So for me, when I think about stigma, I do think about the journey it's been through, but for me, it's very much founded on fear and shame and fear of the known and unknown, just because, and the portrayal of what is in society. So those that are responsible for portraying and showing stories, telling stories, whether it's media, whatever it is, it's making sure that those have a little bit more reality, yes, but the positivity of how to get away from that. But it's being able to put labels on people so that you can define them in ways that they're not, and that's not right.
Right. Thank you. Miguel.
Yeah, I do agree with that. It's definitely putting labels, and the way it comes to my mind is also associated with pain, right? Like having these labels, and specifically negative labels, are painful for yourself and for the people close to you, right? And this also creates kind of like a really complex situation in which you become your label. For example, people that have a mental illness, they normally are associated with, oh, but yeah, they have this. So it's really important to separate whatever your situation is, that be it a mental health issue, be it any kind of difficulty that you're facing on, not to define you, and be sure so that you don't define others by that, right? It's useful, like Anna said, to put people in boxes and labels so that you can know how to kind of relate to them, but then you can hurt others if you only relate by that label and not like their complete self, right?
You're muted, Chisom.
Thanks for sharing. Thank you for letting me know. Like, you think after this many years of using Zoom, we're always, yeah. Anyways, Stigma, I think for me, I remember the first time I had a mental health challenge. I remember reaching out to my mother and saying, I'm not doing well. I'm not doing well. I need help. I need to see a therapist. And then, you know, like she says, are you crazy? Like, what's wrong with you? Are you crazy? You know, like, why do you need to see a therapist? Don't you have everything you need? Don't you have the money you need? Don't you have the house you need? Don't you, like, so it was just the, what is wrong? And then it's this thing where it was like, well, I'm Nigerian. So like Nigerians are not, like they don't have mental health issues. Like it's a luxury to have mental health challenges, and that was interesting for me because it was like the first proper time I understood that it's not okay to have anything that puts my mental well-being outside of the norm that it has been expected to be. Of course, like my mom has since changed her point of view, but that was the initial experience with it. So when I think about stigma, I'm thinking about, just all the ways in which everything we are is nullified or like reflected in a negative light. Like what comes up for me when I hear the word stigma is basically like telling somebody it's okay to be who you are, but all of who you are is not okay. And it's really difficult to reconcile. Like, it's like, come as you are, but maybe that not that part. Oh, maybe not that. Don't talk about that part. Like Wenche, you talked about, somebody saying, do you want to share? Ideally don't share. It's like, come as you are, but maybe put that other part in the closet or in the locker or somewhere else. And so for me, it's yes, there's the shame, there's the pain, but it's also just like the almost like denial of my experience and my reality. And, like positioning that as wrong or abnormal, that how I'm doing is not okay because there is one right way to be. And that restricts me from, at least that used to restrict me from seeking help, from asking for help, or even like being kinder to myself. So that comes up for me when I hear stigma. And then I want to move on to the next.
Chisom, can I add just a comment? Because Miguel talked about labels, and I remember going to the doctor and the diagnosis. I needed the diagnosis, and that's for the public healthcare and the social welfare system. But I was so terrified of what kind of a label that I would get, and I was looking into all these kind of scary diagnosis. And I remember leaving that doctor's office, and I felt like there was a diagnosis in my forehead, and that everyone could see, and it was a P for mental or psychological, and it was a number. And I remember that feeling. I don't want to have this, and I felt everyone could see it on me, that I was damaged goods. So yeah, labels.
My next word is loneliness, or the isolation that comes from mental health. What comes up for you, Wenche?
Well, having been through, months and months and, eventually years of being totally burned out, where I couldn't handle light, sound, movement, my battery was flat and my hard disk was full. That was the way back, the way to try to figure out, how do I get through this? I think I've never been as lonely as I was in those years, because no one around me could understand what I was going through. It was hard for my family and friends to understand. I suddenly started crying, and I was back years ago dealing with stuff in my head and trying to be supportive when you just don't understand. And I felt that I was the only one in the world who had failed this way, that I was the only one who was going through this. I experienced that my colleagues avoided me. I could see them walking, away when I came. I made them, I made them feel insecure because I was like the mental person. And I also needed at the same time to protect myself from people, because there were some people I felt that only they wanted me bad things, like they didn't want the best for me. So I had to, some people I just had to take out of my life because they took all my energy. So I had to kind of protect myself. But I think that the loneliness and the despair of not knowing how long will it take for me to get across, to be happy again, that loneliness was overwhelming. You feel so alone. And I think, you know, after the years after, you know, this is over 20 years since it happened, it has been so important for me to, when I talk to people, to say that you're not alone. You are not alone.
Thanks for sharing. Emma.
I mean, I was just listening to you, Wenche, and just recalling, I mean, I've had, I guess, in my life, different moments of mental well-being, being disruptive or not. And I think for me, the actual real first time that I actually acknowledged it, or not acknowledged, but realized it was happening to me, was after the fact. So I am a mental health first aider, and I became one because I was delivering training, well, looking to deliver training for a group of people in an organization I worked with. It wasn't until I went on the 2-day course that I realized that what I was experiencing 2 years before that was actually a mental health condition, a mental health breakdown. And I mean, they say hindsight is a beautiful thing sometimes, right? But for me, I think that put things in perspective, but also just made me realize how lonely I was during that period of time, because actually it happened during a point where I was made redundant in one of my roles, and suddenly I was just not doing anything. And actually I should have just taken that moment to do things that brought me joy, but actually I was more steeped in that perspective. And I remember, because the person I was seeing at the time, who now is my husband, had traveled for work, and he was gone for quite a long period of time, and I was just home alone by myself, and I became quite reclusive. And I would go through things and just be in my own mind. And for a lot of the time, I felt lonely because I guess I induced it myself, but also lonely because I thought, well, who am I going to speak to about this? And who would even understand? To your point, Chisom, like, we're going to talk about culture. Sure, I'm sure at some point again. But it wasn't just culture from my own. So I'm from Ghana, but it wasn't just about my own culture, but it was how others would relate to me in other cultures. And actually, there's also this thing where everybody else has their burdens, right? You don't want to be a burden to anybody else. You don't want to suddenly make someone start to think about you when they've got other 10,000 things to think about. And then suddenly they start to check in on you several times, and it becomes overwhelming and all that stuff. And that was my whole, for that period of time, which was probably about maybe 6 months, but it was an intense 6 months, because it was just very much, I would wake up late. I just wasn't myself. And it was a very lonely place, because I didn't know what was wrong with me. I didn't know what was happening to me. I knew something wasn't right, but I also found it very hard to communicate. Believe it or not, sometimes I do find it very hard to communicate, especially to the ones that are very close to me, my loved ones. So it was just going through all this stuff alone. And I think, even now I can say there are moments where I feel lonely in my life right now, because I'm a new mother and I'm experiencing different things at that point. And whilst everybody is like, you're not alone, and people have been through it, I think for me, the advice I give to others is to give that space, because no matter how many other people have been through it, your journey is your own. I'm going to try not to get emotional about this, but your journey is your own. And so it doesn't matter how many several times people have been through it, you just have to come to terms with it by yourself, not by yourself, but on your own to some extent, to what Miguel was saying about just, the ownership, but also for the loved ones is to just keep trying and to keep being there, because loneliness comes and goes in different guises. You can be in a room full of people and still feel lonely. So yeah, I'm going to stop waffling, but I think for me that loneliness is in different parts and sometimes in different phases, and not what we suspect. I think even though we tell people we're not alone, I think there's action in saying that. It's checking up with people, it's showing up with a casserole or with a coffee or something, you know, or just calling them, saying that I'm around the corner, because sometimes people just want this space as well. So, but it's the check-in bit. But yeah, the isolation is real and can come in different spaces. And, you know, it just all depends on what journey you're going through. But the recovery is also there. And that the recovery is the ongoing journey, and also the recognition of understanding what you have been through. And even though it might show up in different ways, that you survived that and you can continue to survive with the right support and help. Yeah, so I'll stop there.
When you're saying that, what came up for me, because I've just remembered, well, I remember that sometimes in my episodes, I don't even want to make decisions. So when people come to me and say, or people send me a message, hey, how you doing? Can I come over? I don't want to think. I don't want to make this decision. I just don't want to be responsible for it. If you knock on my door and ring the bell, I might open, you know, so try that. So I struggle with that as well, you know, and kind of just like how mental health is in flux. Like some days I'm able to say, no, I'm not doing well, I need some time. And other days I really just don't have the capacity to make that decision, that it just feels like an additional thing that I have to do or perform, or, you know, put myself together so somebody can, that I'm, you know, kind of like, what's the word? Like you put yourself together so somebody can come see you, that you're presentable.
Yeah, you're presenting,
in a sense, right? Like I have to go change. I have to go take a shower. Like, you know, there's all that when I'm in, you know, a deep, it gets really difficult to navigate those decisions. Miguel.
Hi. Yeah, I think, well, for starters, it's something that I do feel quite often as a migrant from Mexico, living in Norway, because yeah, it's living, at least from my experience, and many people who are migrants as well, is leaving all your network behind and doing the work. So it's actually not only feeling lonely, but actually being alone, right, in this journey, and that is difficult. And on top of that, I think what has made it also challenging for me is that the discourse, or the dominant discourse that I see or perceive here is very individualistic towards mental health. Like it's I agree, it is your journey, like Emma said, but I do, and I will always insist that it's also like a joint or a collaborative effort, because you share the space with people. You are in different spaces with others, and they are also going through different journeys by themselves. So it's like putting or centering most of the responsibility in the individual. I think that pushes you even more towards like feeling lonely, right? Like this idea of like you have to be first feeling well in order to help others. Like, why cannot we just heal together, right? Why do I have to be all right in order to socialize with other people? And that's why, for at least the way I see it, it feels like it is work meeting others. So I think for me, that's what makes it difficult here, like this yeah, individualistic perception of mental health. So yeah. Really
interesting perspective, Miguel, because I think about it from like for something that is, you know, like kind of just like how we deal with mental health, you know, I guess maybe it's also that, at least for me, belief that I'm a buzzkill. Maybe people don't want to be around me. I don't want to bring people down. I don't want to bring the mood down, you know, and I think it's important to also reflect on it from that perspective, from your perspective, in terms of this burden of not being able to be like, hey, jolly, happy-go-lucky, is not just my responsibility, that it's not just on me. So that's a really interesting, yeah, because I know I struggle with, I don't know if you, Wenche and Amma, you struggle with this, where you don't want to be a buzzkill, you know, like, I don't know if it's also part of just like the socialization and how we're expected to show up in the world, then it's also is from experience, right? Because I've had situations where I show up and I'm just like, I'm not doing well. In the middle of an anxiety episode, or I'm about to enter a depressive episode, and people are just like, okay, cool, you know.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting perspective, and I can definitely see where you're coming from on that, Miguel. But I also think the reason why I said individual is because I think there's also that self-identification in self. And I think there's something, and my reasoning behind that is why it's like, you know, you go through an experience and your experience is yours, and you're just because you have that experience doesn't necessarily mean everyone else is going to, but you can probably reflect and share. And I think it takes some kind of intuition to know when someone's not right, because you don't want to misdiagnose or miss an opportunity, miscalculate something, and then through you trying to help that individual, actually what you do is make it worse. So I think it's about having those spaces and creating those spaces and atmospheres, as you say, Miguel, to enable people to feel like, actually, yeah, we can heal together. And it's not being a burden. It definitely comes back, I feel, to me, that burden and stuff. And I won't share with somebody unless I have that trust that will enable me to do so. And that trust can be something as small as little as somebody being kind and open to as big as a gesture. So, you know, I think that it's a balance between the two. I think there's definitely that space. I agree with you, Chisom. I think it's that thing about I just don't want to be that burdensome on that individual. I don't want to be like, oh, well, because I've been through this experience, let me help you through and let me tell you. Because actually one of the things in being a mental health first aider is that we're quite easy to, when we're starting to ask people, is to then share our experience, but actually all we need to do is just listen and be actively listening in that space, and then ask that individual, how do you want me to show up and support you, and then offer that. So I think it's us being able to create those spaces in society where actually being an introvert or being quiet, and it's not always about socializing all the time, wherever those pockets might look like and feel like, or actually it's like, you know what, I'm just going to come over and we're going to sit in silence.
Right.
We're going to watch a movie. We don't have to talk, like, you know, just those things, but it all comes down to relationship building and having those different, and sharing those examples in different ways so people can see, actually, yeah, there are different ways that are more comfortable to embrace that. So I'm not disagreeing with you, but I think it's definitely a balance of two, and it's about relationship and trust, and knowing that if I open up to you, you're not going to use that to weaponize me as a weapon against me, or to benefit you.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of like this conversation, is that we all see this differently. And I think that is very much informed. I mean, there are places where we converge and there are places where we diverge. I think that it also has a lot to do with culture, which I want to bring in now, like just going a bit in depth into this conversation. And I see there's a really good question and comments in the in the chat directed at Wenche, and I will bridge that as well, I think, in one of the next topics we will cover on privilege. But just to talk really quickly about communication, culture, and language. Like, how do you think culture, language, or how we communicate in the societies in which we engage, what impact does that have? Miguel, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I think it's related also with this. I agree. I think it's really interesting because I don't think any of us disagree. It's just like different perspectives, and precisely this cultural perspective is what brings this nuance. In this sense, for example, of building trust and creating space, for me, at least from what I'm used to, is that those spaces are not like they have been created over time, right? It's like to the point that you don't have to think about them being there anymore. You know, like, for instance, meeting up with a friend, you know that you will see that friend, or at least like 2 or 3 times a week, if it's a really close friend to you. You don't have to make plans. And here I've noticed, at least for how lifestyle is and everything, how everything works, that you do have to make plans. Like, I've been given answers even like, oh, where can you meet? And then people answer like, yeah, in week 47. It's like, what is week 47? What does that even mean? You know, it's like, I have to even Google it, like, just to meet up with you. And that's where the work comes in, right? Instead of just being like, you know what what are you doing right now? Like, no, nothing. Okay, let's meet and just go for a beer or something, right? I think the way those small spaces that they just come seemingly spontaneously are the ones that build trust, so that you don't have to feel like you have to do any kind of extra work for you to share with this person or be vulnerable around them.
I think it's so funny when you talk about week 47, you know, because I get that so often, like, how about we meet on week 30? And I just like, 1 second, let me figure out what that is. And at this time, I'm just like, that is months ahead. I don't know what my schedule would be then. So like, ask me a day before, 2 days before, something. But Wenche, I want to come to you. Like, how do you interrogate like culture, language, and communication?
Well, when I think about the word culture and my experience, I can relate it kind of to corporate culture, which may be slightly different, but that's because I was in a culture of winners, of performance, of competition, of being best, and you know, and it wasn't for me. I felt, you know, it was lonely. It was not what I was about. It was not what motivated me, and I was a failure in it. And but you know, back then also we didn't have the words for it. We knew that it happened to people, but if someone just started whispering their names, I knew that it had happened, but that you just disappeared out of the company. No one talked about it, and I think the thing back then was that if this happened to you, you were dead. Career-wise, you were dead. There was, you know, you couldn't come back and kind of survive this. So I think that was what I decided I wanted to change. And I see there's a question about privilege, and we will talk about that shortly. And yes, I was privileged. Oh my God, I was privileged to do that. So I think that's what I can relate to, and fitting in. I didn't fit into the culture. I remember, you know, trying so hard to be good enough. And I remember my first feedback that I got. It was very early in my career, and I was asked if I could please change my dialect to come across as more professional. Everything was wrong with me. That's how it felt. So it was not for me. And I think that's yeah, you know, language matters, words matter, and we didn't have the language to talk about it or the skills. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing, Emma.
Just reminiscing about my career, when you talked about that, because most of it's predominantly been in private sector for me, so I can definitely relate.
Yeah.
To what you're saying. And I think that culture is everything. And I keep saying to people, culture is who we are. We individuals create the culture, whether it's in a workplace, which I'll start from, and then move into actual society. You know, when we talk about high performance cultures, when we talk about uniform cultures in corporate, so for example, you can't look a certain way, you can't dress a certain way, you have to look this way, you have to speak this way. And also come back to high performance, we're already creating unbelievably unrealistic expectations of people, who then start to become stressed, start to really worry about how they're being perceived in the workplace, which absolutely does trigger their mental health and well-being. And when you dissect that from marginalized groups' perspectives, it's even more so worse in terms of that. So I think that your workplace culture, for one, is definitely something that needs to be looked at and addressed from a duty of care responsibility, as we spend so much time at work. But then also I think that, and I wrote an article about this last year about stress in the workplace, which actually is not just related to workplace, because then coming out in terms of culture, when we look at it from backgrounds and experiences, whether it's from the global majority or from a westernized perspective, again, culture plays a part of what's perceived to be great and good and what isn't. And I think that, you know, we have we are doing a disservice to ourselves, but also the generations that are coming before us, after us, not before us, to ensure that we are creating inclusive spaces that they can truly choose to be their whole selves or their true selves, whether it's in the settings of family, friends, or workplaces. Now, I think language matters no matter what you talk about. And language, when we talk about mental health, really, truly matters. The words we use shape how we see the world and how we see ourselves. So ultimately, we have to be really, really cognizant and responsible in the words that we use when we're referencing and talking to people, whether it's to do with mental health or well-being, whether it's to do with race or anything else from a human and humanitarian perspective. You know, the words we choose have meanings and attached to the influences of decisions and beliefs and our well-being. So we have to think about what that looks like. And I think when we approach that, I think it's thinking about how people identify with those words. When you're talking to others, what words they prefer to use, or being respectful in your approach of that, because it's really, for me, it's just really important. I think language is complicated as is, it evolves. So as it evolves, we need to make sure that that as it's evolving, it's still acceptable depending on the audiences and whose experience you are trying to speak to or capture. So, you know, I think it's, when it comes down to it, you know, people will code switch depending on wherever they are. And again, it's coming back to my point of sense of safety and feeling secure and trustworthy with people. And through the words you use, you know, we shared some at the beginning where it was crazy and all that stuff. Like, if you're saying those words in public or saying that if somebody's actually going through something, they're not going to share anything with you. You know, right. Equally, it's how the words we use when we're talking to our friends and our family and our children. You know, we need to be constantly aware and self-aware, and that takes work, but we have to do the work unless there's not going to be any change coming from it. And some of it, yes, I know people know, some people don't, but we're living in a day and age where you cannot say you can't sit there and get the information at a touch of your hand, whether it's via Google, for a better word, or sitting with friends who have been through those experiences. Right. So yeah, I think lived in experiences and cultures where I've had to often code switch. And to your point, Wenche, now I'm not in a mood to do that anymore. I'm just not. And in my role that I have and I play, not just in my day job, but every other role that I play outside of that, I have responsibility to myself and the people that I have around me to learn and to do better. Right. And that's what I think we should do.
Sorry to interrupt, because I have a lot of words to toss out and we don't have a lot of time, so we have to move forward. Just one thing that I want to add on the basis of culture is that for me, I find myself navigating the different cultures that I embody. So on one hand, I find like the Nigerian part of me, you know, challenging the American part of me, like the US part of me, or that the US part of me challenging, you know, the Norwegian culture that I'm a part of, or like other cultures I have acquired in my time living in the Netherlands or also living elsewhere. So I think on the culture basis, even internally, there is a struggle. And I think, you know, this is sometimes where that code switching comes in, because I'm a different Chisom in Nigeria than I am in, say, the US, and than I am in, you know, say Norway, for example. And at the same time, also beyond navigating like different identities that I carry, also thinking about it from a cultural perspective around, like in Nigeria, we're very vocal and outspoken, sometimes almost like, you know, you always know where you stand with us, for better or for worse. And then there are some cultures, they're a bit more passive, you know, like I experience in comparison, say like the Norwegian culture is a lot more passive than say the Nigerian culture, you know, whereas the Norwegian culture can be a lot more outspoken and active than other cultures. So it's in navigating those spaces and also navigating the expectations that we have of ourselves, and also the situations in which we find ourselves in, which leads into the next word that I want to offer, which is privilege. And now I want to offer that word with a question that has been referenced to Wenche, and then we can move, we continue from that. I'm going to read the question out. It says, Wenche, I have been thinking of your statement that you were not going to work in a place where your story was not honored. That to me is a strong statement of privilege. As someone who comes from a culture where financial support during mental health crisis is low or non-existent, there have been many times where I just need a job to survive. I don't have the privilege of being picky. Now I live in a place where there is support, but it's hard to truly embrace that support because I am an immigrant and not from that culture. Do you have thoughts on this?
Oh, yes, I do. And yes, I am privileged and I have been privileged. And, I was privileged to have a husband and a caring family. If I had been a single mom with 2 small kids, 1 and 4, I wouldn't have been able to take care of them. I was privileged in the sense that I had the means to pay for therapy and not being, if I went by, the public system, I would have waited for years to get help, a year typically. So I had the means to buy, to spend money on therapy. I also had the privilege of having extra insurance from my employer, so that when I'd been on sick leave for a year, I had extra insurance to help, in addition to the ones that I got. I'm privileged to live in Norway, to live in a welfare state, to live, and I fully acknowledge that. And I would not have been able to say the same things if I was not privileged. I would have to work, I would have to survive, and I think I was at a point where I was just so broken, I couldn't function, I couldn't, and I fully realized that I am privileged, and I was privileged, and and I can only imagine what this experience would be like if I was not. I am not sure if I would have survived, to be frank. Yeah. So I'm humble. Yeah, I don't know if that answered the question, but yeah, I'm privileged.
I think it does. And I also want to offer a different perspective. I think all of us in some capacity are privileged. Right. So if we look at, for example, being from the US, in the US, you might not be able to get the type of support you get in Norway, but as much as there's a stigma with mental health in the US, at least in my experience, it's not as significant as the stigma for mental health in Nigeria, right? And in both places, you are not going to get help from the government to take care of yourself or to get funding in any capacity. But at least I feel like in the US, I could say to some of my friends or even people or my employer, I'm struggling, whereas in Nigeria, I'm like, what does that even mean? Right. So for me, I'm also looking at privilege. Yes, we have it within the context that we exist in. And I think that for many of us, we also need to look at what that means as we walk through life. Like I identify, well, now I'm a Norwegian citizen through naturalization. And I do share, like I am now in a country where if I have a challenge, I know that the social welfare system will take care of me. But I still have a challenge in Norway where in the sense that I don't have therapists that I feel can actually take care of me. There are not a lot of therapists of color in Norway. So for me, even though this country offers, accessibility when it comes to like mental health care and, a lot of therapists to talk to, I don't find therapists for myself. So my therapist is still based out of the US. And if I need additional care, maybe I look in the UK, but I haven't found a single therapist here that I can work with. So you can also think about that from a privileged perspective, and also just looking at it so on the basis of privilege, having dealt with, navigated my mental health since I was 18. And at this point in my life, I also share that perspective that I will remove myself from any space where I feel like, that it doesn't honor my experience, because for me, it's a life or death situation, and making a living. There was a time when I felt that, and so that doesn't negate, anybody's experience. But I'm at the point in my life where my mental health is a life or death situation, and I will physically remove myself from any space and figure out something else. So on one hand, it's a privilege. On another hand, it's self-preservation and creating strong boundaries for myself, because sometimes I don't create a strong enough boundary that if I catch myself just when it's about to get really, really bad. I don't know if that makes, provides additional context, but yeah, that came up for me around privilege. Amma and Miguel, do you want to share something?
I mean, I'm just conscious of time, but I think that I think privilege also comes down to the ecosystems and the people that actually are holding the purse strings when it comes to accessibility and access to mental health and well-being, or just well-being in that sense. I think there's a big thing around there being a huge difference from a welfare state perspective, from a Western perspective, Norwegian, whether it's UK or US, versus, you mentioned Nigeria, but also in Ghana, West Africa and other areas, not just Africa, but other, southern parts of the world. And I think that also comes back down to the context around just what society dictates is that, and also, unfortunately, we just have to be respectful of people's journeys in this, because yes, for some people, financially, they can't. So the question then becomes, in those spaces that they're in, again, who is holding the power to the culture, whether it's workplace culture or whether it's, whatever that might look like, to change that culture and environment so that that person does not fear that if I leave or if I lose my job, I ultimately will have no financial means to make it through. We are all privileged, yes, in some shape or form. My therapist is not in Norway. My therapist is in the UK. My therapist is Black, but I have the privilege because I looked and searched for that. So yeah, I think it's how those people in privileged spaces can use their privilege for the better good and influence to make sure that those people that can't access the needs that they need to change that. And whether it's through education, justice, health systems, those people that are making these decisions need to really think hard and long about the marginalized groups that are impacted in this and to make that difference.
Right. Miguel, I want to merge the next question, word, and I think we can still bring a privilege, the perspective of privilege into it. But the next word I have is psychological safety, and it merges well with Nikki's question. The question here is, can we hear about team leads with mental health challenges? So I guess in this case, supporting team members with mental health challenges. So in situations where a team member's ability to work or collaborate is significantly affected. And I think this ties in quite well also to psychological safety, as we talk about it within a workplace environment. So Miguel, I'm going to start with you. When you hear psychological safety within the workplace and also how to support team members who are struggling, what comes up for you?
Yeah, I mean, afraid to sound like a broken record. I also think that this is precisely what I also mean with it being a collaborative effort, a shared responsibility among one another, like building a space that it's psychologically safe. And it's also really tied with what we were talking about, privilege, because at least the way I see privilege is like the accumulation of power, or at least the opportunities, more in one part or than over the other, right? So it means like if you are privileged over a specific topic, there's somebody somewhere else that is not, right? So it means that maybe you can try, at least if that other person or the transfer of power is like really hard to trace, because I don't know, globalization and everything else. But if it's within the team, especially within team members, I think this kind of privilege and power can be shared so that people can have the resources and access to opportunities so that they can make decisions for their own. And it's not something that only for example, in this case, the team lead should be responsible for, because then if they create the space with their own power, then they still hold this kind of like the direction and the narrative of how and what the space is built on.
So
but it
how
has
do
to
you
be
tie that into
sorry.
how do you tie that in with the workplace, like feeling safe with your colleagues or team members, or how they're able to support you?
I would say for the way I see it is maybe there's two options, like bringing it into spaces where power is a little bit more balanced. For example, that can be like recreational activities and such, where you can start building trust, where people are a little bit more equal. That's the way I see it for maybe a start. And if that's not possible, then see for it or explore ways together in which they would feel that they have more agency over their work, over how they feel about their work.
Right. Thanks, Miguel. Wenche, what do you think?
You know, one of the things that came out of my life experience was, and that's why I also call it a blessing in disguise, was that I decided that, you know, I need to do some changes in the culture that we had. And, you know, it wasn't safe to be authentic. It wasn't at all. And I think by openly sharing my story and starting a dialogue related to it, things started to change. This was early on. And if you look at the changes in society, or also in that there has become more openness and you know, there was no talking about psychological safety when this happened to me. And what has since happened, you know, I had experienced what it was lacking it, but I didn't have the words or the knowledge for what it meant and how psychological safety can help you thrive as a human being. And that is why I do feel responsible. I feel a sense of, I feel responsibility to the people around me. And my concern right now is to all the young people who are more open about, you know, mental health. And also, you know, when I grew up, we didn't have social media, so I didn't have anyone to compare with that I could see. And all the expectations of what young people, what you are to be and deliver in all areas of life is so overwhelming. And I just hope that, you know, that we are prepared, that my generation have the language and are, you know, that we are prepared to embrace this and be able to have these kind of conversations with the, you know, the young people coming after me, at least. So so I think that, you know, the world is going in that sense in the corporate world, at least that I know of, with the focus on psychological safety and how that impacts us is important. And yes, I do have a responsibility, and I actually, you know, I've been quite open on LinkedIn and share things, and I from time to time get people who, you know, ask me for advice, and I think what I do is sharing hope. That's what I can do. Yeah. I feel like I'm mumbling a lot now, so I'm not. Yeah.
I echo everybody's thoughts, and I've just written mine. I know in short time, so I'm going to just bullet point mine very quickly in terms of this workspace. So I think it's around breaking down the word psychological safety first of all, and explaining it in human terms. What does that mean, and what does that look like and feel like? And it's through the storytelling, giving examples of how that might show up in different perspectives. Storytelling is key in role modeling, especially from a leadership perspective. People are always looking to the top for guidance, and again, if you don't role model that, people just don't take the authenticity. And I think there's something special with that group, particularly as leaders, that need to be more vulnerable, need to be more kind, and need to think about it from an empathy perspective of how they show up in order for their teams to do the same. Equipping managers is very key to this for me. I think there's an essence around when we are hiring, when we are looking for our next managers, our new managers, our existing managers, how are we equipping them with the perspective of pastoral care? So how do they understand as a manager what their role is to ensure that they are having the right conversations at the right time? So again, during that training, it's looking at duty of care and responsibilities there. I've mentioned I'm a mental health first aider. Having mental health first aid in the organization is also really good, because there are people that people can be signposted to look for the right help. They are not therapists, they're not counselors, but what they are there to do is to help that individual go through what they're going through and signpost them through to the right things. So that's a great way to actually start introducing them. If you have ERGs, employee resource groups in your organizations, or if you have people that are looking at health and safety, you can also add that as part of that. And think about holistically, when you're thinking about your well-being perspective, what does that look like from an employee experience, from start to finish, to integrate it into your strategies and your people stuff. Well-being check-ins, I can't say this time long enough. If you're having your check-ins, you should be having your check-in with your line managers, and also as a group. How are you doing your team meetings together? How are you checking in on individuals? Are you just talking about work? Are you making sure that individual is also thought of as an individual? Are you asking the right questions, and not just how you're doing today, but have you had lunch? Have you had breakfast? Oh, I noticed you were online yesterday at X amount of time. Why? These questions and prompting softly with support enables that individual to actually, over time, or sometimes they might own up straight away, to talk to you and share their burden. The person talks about work. Again, looking at work allocations, how you support the team in that, and how people collaborate in different times and spaces. And having a multi-generation understanding. We're living and working in this day and age where we have layers of different generations in organizations. We need to stop, especially the older generation, telling the younger generation they need to earn their stripes because it was tough for you. No, don't do that. It was tough for you, so now you make sure that the other people that are coming through aren't tough for them as well. So if you're in a leadership position, think about what type of leader you want to be, and think about what your legacy is when you leave that organization, and how you influence the culture first. As same goes to people managers, and for all staff, we are all responsible for inclusion, and we're all responsible, like Miguel mentioned earlier, for each looking after each other. The beauty of where I used to work before is we actually had something where we said that we will look after each other's well-being and care. So we are responsible for us. Help me help you, but we will also help you too. So those are just some of the things. There's great resources, tools, etc. out there that can help people do that in a daily practical way. So I'll keep quiet now.
That's great list. Thanks, Amma. I'm just thinking about what I can add to what you and Miguel and Wenche have said. I'm a data person. I like to be able to break down or articulate, like, you all said, what is psychological safety? What does that mean in like simple variables? Is it that if I have something to share, no matter how difficult, that I can say it, and that will be received with curiosity, with openness, with a willingness to understand more, even when it's not understood. That is something that I can measure, right? If it's that I can show up at work and say, I'm not doing well today and I need support. Like how many people in the workplace can, hopefully say, yep, 100% every single time I can show up and say, I'm not doing good, yo. I think that's also quite important in what you can measure. I think for me, just sharing from my experience as a leader, I think being able to articulate, there was a time in my career where I was, unable to share that, hey, I am in currently a depressive episode, or, I'm having intense anxiety. But now, it's so important to me that I share that because it's the truth, and sometimes, it's like show up as you are, and I take that quite literally. And sometimes I can only show up 10%, and today 10% is the absolute best you can get out of me, but I'm going to show up, and I'm going to show up in honesty. So I think also in modeling the behavior that I want to, see in my team, one of the things I struggle with, I have to say, is, I feel like as a leader, there is a lot of responsibility on leaders as well. And there's not a lot of care for leaders in terms of the leader is responsible to model all this behavior, to take care of everybody else, but who takes care of the leaders? And this is something that I actively navigate on a daily basis in terms of like, where do we go for help? So I think like support groups, even for other leaders, for people who manage teams, it's important. Amma, you talked a lot around what you mentioned about like, people managers, giving them the skills and all of this. I think that's absolutely important. There's a lot to be said about awareness, education, and giving people tools to actually navigate a good environment and increase psychological safety in the workplace. I think what is also quite important as a parent, as a leader, as all of this that compounds in my experience, to also feel that I have that safety in my team to share, you know, to also say, hey, this frustrates me and this is how I'm feeling about the situation right now. And maybe I have time to reflect later and put on my leadership hat. But sometimes I just kind of want to exist without having that extra responsibility of being, you know, or showing up as the leader without also centering myself or my feelings. So it's a dance, right? It's like it's a dance I go through. I see you want to say something?
Oh,
No?
Oh, no, I was just going to actually say, just to add to that, was very much around peer support. You're right, as leaders, so much surmountable responsibilities placed on us, especially if you're CEO, leading suite, etc. I think there's something around looking for support within your peers, because that's quite fundamental too. So within your support groups, within leadership teams, how are you also supporting each other? You know, how are you getting to know each other outside of just being leaders in the workplace? You know, I think there's definitely that respect for personal space. And again, depending on what culture you're in, it might come out more prevalent than others. But I think one of the ways to support each other is to get together as peers in your peer groups to do so. And then also think about how you can do stuff through reverse learning, again, coming in from another person's perspective to understand that.
Right.
That's what I wanted to say.
Yeah. And I think that also represents a form of privilege, because you need to have the people to have like a peer group, so to say, to talk to. But I do want to move on to the next thing here. For each and every one of us here, what does allyship feel like? Like when we navigate our mental health, what is allyship? What is support? Wenche, I start with you.
Yeah, I have, you know, at my last employer at Accenture, we have this global mental health allies, which I think was it's very related to what Alma is talking about, where we train people that actually, you know, educated themselves on the basis of mental health and could be, and what offerings were available, and also being able to have these conversations about mental health, but being a signpost to where you could find additional support. And that was an amazing experience, and it really worked, because once, you know, when people get to HR, it's often too late. You know, you need to, what we want is for people to stop and reflect on symptom levels. And if you don't get help when things are developing, it's often quite late that HR is involved in cases to try to start helping people. So for me, allyship is, you know, being informed and caring about people, and you know, using their experiences and that you have to help others. And like I've said, I think I felt so alone with it when it happened to me, that I really thought that I was the only one. I remember actually asking the doctor, am I the only one in this region, this part of Oslo, who's going through this? And she said, no, of course you're not. But it was so lonely. So I think being allies and being supportive and helping each other is hard. And of course, I wish that someone had told me that someone had stopped me and said, you know, you need to stop now, because you're going to burn out. And but how could they? I couldn't even stop myself. So I think having allies is crucial, and helping each other because sometimes, you know, I was on autopilot. I wasn't, you know, I was just focusing on delivering and delivering and delivering. So maybe I wouldn't have listened, but I really believe in allyship and speaking up and being informed and educated, and yeah. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing. Miguel.
Yeah, for me, yeah, thank you for that. I completely agree. What else comes from me is also being sensitive in the way that, yeah, like looking into all these small details that might signal you that somebody is not doing well, at least in the context of mental health, like being sensitive to others' experiences, to others' feelings, and validating them. Of course, like if someone tells you that they are feeling a certain way, then say like, instead of saying like, yeah, you shouldn't because blah, 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 it's like, okay, it's completely fair for you to feel like this, given your situation or where you're coming from and how you experienced it. And then just at least just that validation is a really good start in my opinion. And then just asking if the person needs just for you to be there, which is also enough, or doing something else. Yeah, but yeah, for me it would be having this sensitivity to others' experiences and validate them. Yeah.
Amma.
It's all those things, including creating safe spaces for individuals to be able to discuss and share when they're ready to. It's using your privilege to influence change and change things where you can. It's around sharing your stories, again, and the experience to make sure people know that they're not alone. It's helping. And one of the things I want to say is that sometimes people will manifest or present that they're going through an experience. But actually, if you listen and you share, so I've got alliances and friendships down there, but if you hear and you talk and you're talking just to the person generally, you have a relationship, you're building a relationship, things will come up. Like, if, for example, if someone just says, oh, I'm going to be on my own today and I'm looking up, I'm looking after the kids or whatever, or today I'm doing this, X, Y, Z. And actually, if you're free, like, well, let's do something together. Because I'm saying like, that person won't say, oh, I'm going through an anxiety attack or I'm going through this, but they will represent it in other ways that they are experiencing things in life. And if someone's saying or intimates that they're either going through something on their own or shows somewhere from that, they might need help, but they're not telling you directly, it's offering that help. And for me, allyship is showing up. It's like, it's not just about picking up the phone and saying hello, but actually saying, you know what, Amma, what are you doing this weekend? What has you got with the girls? Is it okay if I come? And asking, is it okay if I come around? And letting that people know that, it's just being part of that person's life when they're open to allow you to be. And everything else everybody else has said. I think that's real allyship for me.
Thank you for sharing. I do agree with what you shared. And Amma, when you were sharing just now, what came up for me was thoughtfulness. I sometimes when I'm struggling, people ask me, how are you? And I say, I'm surviving, because it feels like that's what I'm doing, and it's always it feels really good to feel seen when people write me like an hour later or a day later, like, hold up, you said you're surviving, what's going on? What can I do? Can I come cook for you? Can I come take, say my daughter out? So can I come take your daughter out for a few hours so you can rest? So it's that thoughtfulness, like, and it doesn't always happen, on the spot, because I'm also like that, sometimes I hear things and I'm like, oh, great, wonderful, because you're distracted and doing multiple things at the same time, but then thinking about it later and checking in like, hey, I'm thinking of you. So sometimes it's even something as simple as thinking of you, praying for you, hoping you're doing well. That makes a huge difference. And asking and not making assumptions, for me, that is also a form of allyship, because I think that I know I present as strong, I have everything together all the freaking time, and there's nothing further away from the truth, and I think like that being recognized, and so when I don't have to remind people, I have to juggle a lot, and sometimes I'm literally feeling like I'm surviving or like I'm about to drown, so just having people, like think about that and knowing that, okay, she looks like she has it together, but hey, if you bring her soup for dinner so she doesn't have to cook today, that also makes a huge difference. Of course, like it's with people I have a close relationship with. So for me, allyship comes down to thoughtfulness.
There's little words. When you hear someone say they're tired and you've heard it more than once, something's up. You hear someone saying they're busy and they keep saying it, it's like, well, okay, what's up? Like, it's little words. It's the little words that actually have more impact than the actual, well, I'm having an anxiety moment right now. Because for me to get to tell you I'm an anxiety moment, several things probably would have happened before then. So it's about listening out for the cues and then asking the questions.
Right.
And not being evasive with those questions, but leading with compassionate empathy as you are asking those questions. More often than not, people will then open up to you because they see that you are generally like, you said you're tired 3 days in a row now. What's wrong? You're okay.
Yeah.
What do you need?
Yeah. Yeah. So the next words I'm going to healing and well-being. So what does that mean to you? How have you, Wenche, I know you shared earlier about your, your experience. What is healing for you? What is well-being to you?
I think for me, everything changed when I dared to be my, authentic self, when I started to believe in myself and not by the performance management system that my employer had that defined my value or how good I was. When I realized that I'm good enough in me, in who I am, and I'm enough. I think for me, that was the healing process of understanding that I am good enough. I don't have to perform to be good enough. And I think also going through the process of when I realized and that I was good enough and stopped striving for perfection and finding my authentic self, that's also when I found my purpose in life. And when I found my purpose, I also found my voice in life. And that was the healing process for me. And since then, I've used that voice to make, a difference in the world that I'm in trying to make it more human and more authentic. And I think also the healing and the well-being has also given me, hope and joy and balance and harmony. And I think of course now I'm 60 years old, and I thought my life was over at 37, that I would be dead career-wise. And I have learned that there's a beautiful career. I have taken that space. There's a career after 50, there's a career after 60. I mean, I just changed job 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago. And I thought everything was over. But I feel so, I am where I'm supposed to be. And that is an awesome feeling. It's an awesome feeling. So that's what, that I can use my voice and be happy and thriving in my life. And I'm not afraid anymore. I've been at the low point and I survived. So yeah, life is great. Life is good. And I'm so grateful for my life. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Yes.
Thanks for sharing. That was so hopeful. It's just like, yeah, that felt so good to hear. I know you have to run soon, so I'm going to come to you with that question as well.
Yeah, I can hang on for a few minutes. Just things you said resonate with me, Wenche. I think the thing around validation is what we need to understand is feedback from people will always be different and subjective. Someone's expectation of you in one career could be different in another career. So my question, and again, in life, is the same thing. So I think we need to ask ourselves why the validation of the people we seek and the opinions of the people we seek matter. And are we seeking them from the right people? Because yes, even with family, it can be overwhelming. And sometimes we put that onus on ourselves. But once we've truly asked ourselves those questions and keep asking ourselves our questions, we'll realize that actually most of that is just white noise, as I like to say. And the people that really matter will be with you through the journey and will understand that whatever their expectations are, they need to change and shape according to you. And I've also learned that for myself, and not just myself, but also how my expectations of the ones I love too. I'd also want to say that healing for me and well-being is still a journey and an evolving one. I don't think there is an absolute perfect way of doing that because life always throws curveballs at you. But the thing that keeps me grounded in that peace, and it's interesting because my dad said this to me when I was very young. I am Christian and I'm a very deep believer in my faith. And he always said to me that human beings will disappoint you, whether you like it or not at some point in time. But if there's not there needs to be a higher reason and a higher being and purpose of life. You are on this planet for a reason. And my dad I was raised Catholic, but not a Christian, but he's very much devout in his faith. The reason why I say that is because, yes, when all hope is lost, there is somebody there is God. I believe in God. There's a higher being that I can call to give me that strength and that belief and faith. Whatever that looks like to you, find it. And it does exist out there. And, you know, for me, I think hope, faith, and love are the key things to my healing and my well-being and my journey. And knowing that I'm not always going to get it right sometimes, and I'll always fall sometimes. If I live another day and I am able to wake up and see another morning, I have purpose in that morning. And each day brings new mercies and new opportunities. So for me, it's just taking each day as the time comes, and also learning the lessons from my journey thus far.
Thank you. Miguel.
Yeah, for me, it's like, I also was listening to Wenche and it's like, oh, I want to be there. I hope I'll be there too. But yeah, for me, I do agree. It's for me, well-being is being at peace with who you are. It doesn't necessarily being well all the time, but being able, for example, to feel a wide range of emotions and react in a way that is healthy for you and the people around you. Because it's okay to be angry at some point. It's even necessary in some circumstances, right? But the way you act on it is what ultimately takes you to a place that it's either, at least the way I see it, it's beneficial for you, or it can be like more difficult. This, of course, assuming that all of your basic human needs are met. I'm always conscious about this, but yeah, if you're in a place where you have all these basic needs met, and your problems come to a major extent to you, then yeah, where you are at peace with yourself.
There's a question here about how do you show up at work when you're not doing well with your mental health? And I think maybe it ties into, you know, words like resilience, authenticity, belonging. So what comes up for you when you hear this, Wenche?
So this was the one for, was it resilience?
Yes.
Yes.
Resilience.
Yeah. And I think that through what I have experienced, that I realized that I'm so much more stronger than I thought I was. And I remember, you know, going through, and I was in despair, and I asked, you know, I said to the psychologist that I was so afraid of losing control. And he said to me, you're not losing control, you're expanding your control. And that was a mind shift that that made me feel so powerful. And you know, and I know that once you have experienced a burnout, you know, you're often afraid that it will happen again. But what I do know, that if it happens again, I know that I'm strong enough to handle it. I know that I will survive. And I actually look upon, you know, rising from the ashes of the burnout as one of my biggest achievements in life. And it has made me resilient, but it's also helped me to put things into perspective, and also to be kinder to myself. I did the best I could. And also this enormous gratitude for the life that I've been blessed with. And there was a question also here about how the world, you know, what's going on in the world. And, you know, it just makes me speechless. It's heartbreaking. It makes me humble, and, you know, being so privileged and blessed to be born in the time and in the places where I was born. I'm, you know, I struggle to find the words, and my mom, she's 84. they were poor, and during the Second World War, my mom starved. They didn't have food. So one generation ago, my mother starved. And that's just, yeah, it's hard to find the word. So I think gratitude and being humble, humility, is that the word? Being humble. Yeah, yeah, I think that's all yeah.
Thanks for sharing. If I could share on resilience, I think resilience is a journey. I think I am very resilient as a person, and I'm trying to interrogate if I have been conditioned to be resilient. So it's a programming thing that I'm trying to unpack for myself. But resilience is being able to name things. I find that life improves significantly for me. My mental health improves when I'm able to articulate my feeling, name it. I don't need a solution, but just to say, this is what is stressing me out. And I'm also able to see the complexity of situations. I think learning that these too shall pass, that has also been quite important for me, because sometimes, like when you're in the middle of it, you don't see a way through it. Just recognizing, I think, like Wenche alluded to it, Amma talked about just knowing that if I can just make it to tomorrow, that this too shall pass. That has been very helpful in shaping, my mind around like resilience, but I know that resilience also comes with, how I can show up as myself in all its complexity, all my complexities, how I am accepted by the people around me, how, of course, things like, what is currently going on in the world puts life in perspective, that like, but I'm also mindful as well not to look at it could be worse scenario. So be grateful for what you have, because that can also be harmful for people who are struggling or in a dip. So resilience is a thing I'm still trying to unpack, in how it shows up for me. But my main thing is reminding myself that you just need to take it one day at a time. Like, just get to the next hour or to the next day, because these too shall pass. Amma.
Yeah, no, I there's nothing more to add to that. I think I totally resonate with both of you. I definitely do think resilience is conditioned, and it's part of our DNA because it's the fight or flight thing, right? So it's either you're gonna fly away in fear or fight it. And resilience, I think, compartmentalize you just to stick it into that box, be resilient, and deal with it another day. So I think for me, resilience is very much, again, of really understanding what that means to you. And sometimes it's not about strength. It's just like you say, about acknowledging, accepting, and being kind and forgiving. I'm still working on the forgiving part for myself, because I think it's really important that we really understand for ourselves what that means to us, and that it's not always the strong, aggressive, masculine, whatever words, terminology that you want to face with it to be part of that. I think it's very much about the soft pieces as well, and knowing that, yes, it shall pass. And when it passes, getting a moment to reflect on how you dealt with it, to know how to deal with it again, because it will come in different guises. And just knowing what that feeling, and what the difference is, the feeling that connects you to what you're associating with is what enables you to push forward and move on, just like when Miguel said about emotions and being in touch with that.
Thank you. Miguel. Resilience.
I do like, I do like the concept. It's I think it's really nice. I'm just worried about like how sometimes when it's talked about, like it's talked about as a journey, but it seems that it's a shorter journey than it is, right? Like this phrase, like what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Maybe what doesn't kill you just traumatizes you, right? And before getting into the stronger part, first you have to like deal with this trauma, right? And process it, and it takes a lot of time. So resilience sometimes is not something that happens just right away. It may take years. And I think being aware of that, it's also good. And it's also important for you to also accept and forgive yourself for not being as resilient as you wished you were. And sometimes you just need like going specifically into like how do I show up when I'm not unwell at work. Well, you show up unwell, right? Sometimes you just maybe, of course, put on a facade for most of the people, but sometimes you just need one pair of eyes to see you, like one other pair of eyes to see you and to share their perspective with you. And I think it's important to take that risk. Like if there's someone that you trust at least enough to reach out and say, I'm not feeling okay at the moment, do it. I think that's always a really good place to start.
There's a word coming up for me. Thanks, Miguel. That also matches with a question that I think Emil just asked about caring for each other. And the question from Emil is, how have you ever experienced that a certain mental health issue you were dealing with clashed negatively with a mental health issue someone else was navigating at the time, making things worse for everyone involved? If yes, how did you deal with that? And I think this kind of like circles around the phrase like caring for each other. What comes up for you? Like I'm struggling with a mental health challenge and you're struggling with a mental health challenge and they clash.
That's a really good question. I'm going to end on this question because I generally have to go, but I think it's not about pinning whose mental health issue is more important than the other. I think it's about, again, sometimes when you're in this space, you don't even have time to think about, well, why are we clashing in the first place? And you don't understand me because you're not paying attention to me or you're not listening to what I'm saying. But actually, if we just stopped maybe for a second and like thought about, okay, you're going through this and I'm going through this. How is it that we can resolve this to help each other? Or actually, there's sometimes we just need to be apart and give each other space to do that. I think it sounds simple, it's not, and I'm not sure how to unpick it, but I think it is very much something along those lines of like, actually, where is the white flag in this? Where actually, if we're clashing, why are we clashing? And are there other issues involving us clashing? Are there other things at play here that are playing part of us clashing? Or do we just don't want to understand each other? And if we don't want to understand each other, do we just agree to disagree and just keep each other's space until we can have space to come and commune? Or actually, is there space where we can just say, you know what, do we need mediation in this? And who's the right mediator for us to help us get through this? I think it's exploring those different things. I know I don't know, maybe I'm simplifying it, but I'm just thinking about some situations where I've been in where I'm like, well, actually, yeah, am I pinning against this individual because they're not listening to me and they're not hearing me? And they're saying that what they're going through is more important and more detrimental than what I'm going through. How do we break that barrier?
Right. Words that are coming up for me hearing you talk about this, and well, it's a really great question, Emil, because I'm just trying to process that. But words that are coming up for me is grace and expectations. I think if I think about it, like two scenarios come up for me. Say my sister is struggling, which at some point she was, and I was struggling. And she needed me there for her, but I just could not be there for her. And at the same time, I was struggling, but I felt that she was not seeing my struggles and just centering her struggles. So that was a situation that was really tricky to navigate, because on one hand, I was not showing her grace, and on the other, she was not showing me grace. And I think recognizing that we're all fighting a battle in some capacity, to put it in that way, that we also need to lead with grace and perhaps release people from expectations, because we don't know what people are carrying. You know, I've also thinking about it from a workplace perspective. There's been a situation where, for example, somebody I was working with was struggling, with, work or leadership. And at the same time, I'm struggling, and I'm just like, right now, we actually cannot engage. Right now, we need space to process, to unpack, and then we'll see how we feel when we both have that space, also as a way to show grace and give grace to each other. So that's not always easy, because you can't pour from an empty cup. So it's also always that thing you have to navigate, actually. Miguel,
I'm going to leave now, but it's the discernment in that grace, being able to discern. And when we have the fog, as I like to call it, we ultimately go into that me first mentality, but actually sometimes it is taking a step back, say, look, I know you're going through things and so am I. I love you. If it's a relationship that you can say that, I love you, but we need to either resolve this or just give each other space. And the same thing in the working field, where again, if you can't navigate that, who else can actually make that words, who can say that on your behalf to enable you to give you that space. So yes, thank you all. I really have to go now.
Thanks for being
I
here.
love being part of this panel, and yeah, take care of each other, and more importantly, also yourselves too.
Thanks so
Great
much.
to meet you, Amma.
Thank
Bye.
you, Amma.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Wenche, I'm gonna come to you with the question. Like,
Yeah.
How do you navigate this?
What question?
The question about when you have, clashing mental health challenges.
One thing that I've been thinking about is that how burnout kind of has been like a badge of honor, like you've given it all, and kind of a privileged kind of, I don't know, it's not there's not in Norway, it's not a diagnosis for that, it's depression, but it's kind of a, I don't know, it's yeah, that you just deliver so much that you lose perspective, and this happens, but it's kind of in a, at least for me, I mean, it was in a privileged world as such, and I don't think that I've and I also realize when I say, you're not alone and life will be good again, for some people it's chronic. It will not be, life will not be, they have to live with this for the rest of their lives. And I'm talking about, working too much and not feeling good enough in a corporate performance management system. I mean, there are different worlds, and I can only imagine what it must be like to live with a chronic mental illness that will be there for life, that will come back and be there forever. But I haven't really experienced where it was kind of, competing. But sometimes I can feel that the burnout is kind of a luxury. I don't know. I've been reflecting upon that it's it's something that kind of created. I don't know. I just
I think it could have something to do with this, like, performance culture, if your diary is not full back to back, then you're not performing. Like, there's some pride in having, full days where you could barely breathe. We know better, but we still know we exist in, a world, in workplaces where, that type of busyness is considered successful, considered the norm or the goal. But there's a question here that I wanted to bring back to you, Wenche, which is, how do you talk about, I think it's from Stephanie, how do you talk about periods of burnout and mental health crisis in job seeking, especially while still wanting to be a positive candidate for the position? How do you overcome the stigma?
I was starting to write answer to that one, because I think, I think reflecting upon that before you go into an interview, so that you're not taken, off guard. I also believe in owning things that happen to you. I also believe in, finding out the words that describe, what did you learn from this? What kind of skills, and put it into a positive frame, like this is, relevant. It has made me into a better leader because I have gained more experience, because these kind of gaps are filled with life itself. And it has taught you, it made you stronger, it has made you wiser, it has made you learn about how to handle difficult things. So try to frame it in a positive way by what you have learned and what kind of skills and knowledge that you have gained. But be prepared and practice how to answer that question before you go into an interview or a process, because this is like I said, I studied at the university for many years, but the burnout, I think that was my PhD. That was really what gave me, life experiences. And I think also that we will see that handling difficult challenges in life, it builds resilience, and it you don't need a master to demonstrate and to learn. Yeah, I don't know if that was an answer, but yeah, that was what I was thinking. Yeah.
I think, I mean, I'm thinking about myself, like, how do I leverage this in, securing projects, for example, when sometimes you have to wear a shoe to know where it hurts. And I think a lot of us, we exist in, workplaces where when we struggle with our mental health and our well-being, or when we struggle with anything, period, outside of the workplace, we don't show up at work and like, all right, I'm at work now, so I'm going to just park all these other feelings, all these other things I'm dealing with at the door. It doesn't happen like that. We have to we show up at work as all that we are. So I think sometimes as well, having had a burnout, having had, challenges with our mental health, informs us on the importance of being more healthy, the importance of creating workplaces where people can actually thrive, the importance of not overworking people. I think that brings us great reflective skills that are so beneficial in the workplace. Wenche, the chances are, because of your experience under your current remit, as the head of DEI at DNB, you were so mindful about how other people were faring, that if you see somebody saying, like, I feel overworked, I'm about to burn out, that for you, that is already like a red flag, that, okay, how do we help this person? It's not to give them more work. It's like, listen, what can we do to support you? And I think it's important to reflect on what we have learned from the experiences that we've had.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think hopefully workplaces recognize that lived experience trumps anything you can read in a book.
Yes.
You've been able to go through something so profound and come out on the other side of it, and say, like, this is what I've learned, this is what it has taught me, and this is how, this knowledge can benefit, even how I work, how I engage with my colleagues. That creates a better atmosphere for working.
Chisom, I'm also thinking about, if you are a refugee, what you've been through, if you lived in an asylum home, I don't know the English word. Imagine,
centers,
imagine the resilience and what you have experienced. I mean, the lessons learned, the survival skills, the drive, what it's
like being an immigrant, being able to leave your country and show up another one, learn a new language or not, adapting to a new culture, like those things. Because I think, like, I read somewhere that actually moving countries and immigrating to a new place is actually a traumatic event for a lot of people. And being able to adapt, that is hard skills that companies can benefit from. Absolutely. Mindful of time. So I kind of just want to end this by looking at joy and peace. What are some actionable practices that we can share when it comes to practicing joy and finding a sense of peace to, protect or safeguard your mental health and well-being? Miguel, I'm going to start with you.
So is it about what can you do to protect and safeguard your peace?
What do you do? So share if you have experience to share on what do you do? What does joy and peace mean to you? And what are actionable practices that have helped you in the process?
Well, joy, for me at least, joy and peace are things that I always prefer to experience with other people, not by myself. So I try to always have this spaces where I can share with others, and I can like just maybe going out for dinner, going for a walk, like these kind of things. I can do it myself, but I do enjoy them more doing it with someone else. So that's more That's more me. And at least for me, in my experience being a migrant here, one of the best practices has been pushing myself to be in these spaces, because I know it already takes a lot of energy on a day-to-day basis, living in a foreign country, because there's a lot of uncertainties that are tied to it. And there's also this huge uncertainty that if you make other friends, especially migrants, because are not the people that normally you relate to more quickly, that they will leave, right? And that's also kind of a difficult thing to navigate with, because it's like, do I put the effort in this relationship that might end at some point, especially with us being from different places? And I would say that we should always take the risk if it's within our possibility. If we have that ounce of energy to do it, I would say so, because then you start building your community, and it's more likely than not that the other person feels the same.
Right. Thanks. I love how a lot of your, your insights around mental health and well-being is very much collective based and like community based. I really love that. I really love that.
Yeah.
And I think it's so remarkable. Like, we live in quite individualistic worlds where we're just looking at ourselves and how things affect us, but to have that collective and community perspective is so beautiful. Wenche, I'm going to come to you.
Yeah, I think that, one of the good things about the pandemic was that it really introduced us to more flexibility in the workforce. And I believe that if I had to be in an office from 8 to 4 every day, I may not have been able to work full time. And what I have learned through this is when my head is full, when I'm, when there's not room for anything more, when my head is full and there's nothing more to get out of it, I leave and I go to coffee shops. And I sit at the coffee shop and I have my cappuccino and I'm mindful, I smell it, and I'm totally into that coffee and I'm so happy. And that is where I'm charging. And I have peace of mind. I'm just there enjoying my coffee and I can sit there for hours. That's how I recharge. And that's what I'm going to do after we are done today. I have been delivering training since 9 o'clock, then go straight to this. I'm going to go to a coffee shop and I'm going to sit there and smell the coffee and just be grateful. That's my thing. Yeah.
That's nice.
Thanks a lot for sharing, and thanks for being here. I know like a few times when I've spoken to you, you're like, yeah, I'm at the cafe,
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
I think for me, how I find joy and navigate peace is just boundaries. Not just creating boundaries for other people, but also creating boundaries for myself. I think that one of the ways I have found joy is I used to spend a lot of time thinking about, I hope people see me, I hope people hear me. And I had to internalize that and say, I need to hear myself. I need to see myself. So it's in taking a lot of power back and internalizing that I have power. I am responsible in how I react to the things that happen in my life. Spending quality time with people. So they are part of me, sides of me that I also love, that community, but also spending quality time with myself. I really enjoy my company. And so that has been quite, great. But also having conversations like this. I think like just sitting through these 2 hours of like hearing from all of you and seeing the chat and the questions, it feels therapeutic, and just, yes, I also want to thank you both, and Amma, who's no longer here, and also just the audience on LinkedIn and here for joining in on this conversation and creating space for us to share our experience. We're not experts, but, just having space where we can unpack our feelings and also learn from each other is so, I'm so grateful for. So thank you all for being here. Thanks, Wenche, for, being here in spite of your hectic day. And thanks, Miguel, as well, for sharing, and you all. I've learned so much. I need to rewatch this to reflect some more, but thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.